Thank you. Shall I start now? Okay.
Please, sir.
Good evening. I, on behalf of AY West Bengal, welcome you all in today's Journal Club meeting. As you all know, our Beyond's journal has taken a new high, for which I thank the Executive Committee and members of editorial boards from my heart. Our Bengal Journal of Otolaryngology and Head Neck Surgery is committed to maintain its standards of principles of academic publication, which have been appreciated since its inception. Beyond's is indexed with DOAG and is one of the few Indian journals that still conform to the requirements of MCI for your academic and promotional purposes. All the articles published in Beyond's since 2015 are now part of the LOCKS project under the auspices of Stanford University. We are conducting regular monthly clinical meetings, orations, other academic sessions by many of our renowned members during this lockdown period. By this Journal Club meeting, we want to make sure that our young generation gets information about how to publish papers and can also analyze and criticize the articles and connect with new thoughts. I thank Sanofi for supporting us and hosting this program and hand over the mic to Mr. Manoj Joshi to say a few words. Over to Mr. Joshi, please.
Thanks, Dr. for giving this opportunity. I would just take not more than 1.5 minutes. First of all, warm welcome to each one of you for this academic feast. And on behalf of Sanofi, sir, along with my colleagues Manojda, Papan, and Jonaji, and many colleagues who are possibly waiting for this opportunity to learn from each one of you, and all the participants, I would like to welcome each one of you. In today's session, which is going to be academic feast in true sense for all the participants and going to be an interactive session through panel mode, we have eminent clinicians who are helping us actually to disseminate the scientific facts. To name, we have Dr. Dwaipan Mukherjee, sir, who is the moderator for today's session, Dr. S.N. Bandopadhyay, sir, Dr. Snehashish Burman, sir, Dr. Kamalendu Aldar, sir, Dr. M.N. Bhattacharya, sir, and we also have from AIIMS, Dr. Saurav Sarkar, sir. So we are extremely thankful to you, AY West Bengal, for giving us an opportunity to partner in terms of at the end of it for the patient's benefit and discussing the topics which are much relevant for the patient's benefit in today's context. With this short brief introduction and my thanks to and greetings to each one of you, I would like to request Dr. Dwaipan Mukherjee, sir, to help us by taking the proceedings ahead. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good evening and namaskar to all of you. First of all, I'd like to thank Sanofi for helping us to host this AY West Bengal Journal Club. As our president, Dr. Shubhajit Bandopadhyay, has already mentioned, this AY West Bengal Journal Club is an unique initiative by AY West Bengal Executive Committee to help the young and upcoming ENT surgeons for their publication and for analyzing their skill of the papers and articles in different journals. So today we have two parts in AY West Bengal Journal Club. The first part is one panel discussion and the second part is for the publication. For the panel discussion, we have 4 eminent panelists, and for the publication part, we have Dr. Saurav Sarkar, Associate Professor from All India Institute of Medical Science, Bhubaneswar. He will deliver that part of the lecture. So for the first part, we are having the panel discussion. So without wasting much time, I will start the panel discussion. So the topic of today's panel discussion is management of chronic sinusitis, medical versus surgical. And today we have 4 senior ENT consultants in the panel. Dr. Kamalendu Aldar, senior consultant in Apollo Gleneagles Hospital. Dr. M.N. Bhattacharya, senior consultant in Peerless Hospital. Dr. S.N. Bandyopadhyay, the professor in Calcutta Medical College and also editor of BJO HNS and editorial chairman of our All India Journal, and Dr. Snehashish Burman, honorary secretary of AY West Bengal and senior consultant in Chotushkon ENT Center. Now, as we all know, chronic rhinosinusitis is basically the chronic inflammation of the mucoperiosteal lining of the nose and paranasal sinuses, where two or more of the four cardinal symptoms are present for more than 12 consecutive weeks. That means facial pain and pressure, hyposmia or anosmia, nasal discharge, nasal obstruction, and in some cases, fever. Along with these features, obviously, there should be objective evidence inside the nasal cavity. Now, I will ask this question to Dr. Komalendu Haldar. According to you, what is the importance of anterior rhinoscopy in diagnosis of chronic rhinosinusitis? This is number one. And in this era of COVID, whether you will go for anterior rhinoscopy for all your cases where you are suspecting chronic rhinosinusitis.
The anterior rhinoscopy is not the proper diagnosis of the cases of the chronic rhinosinusitis. Only the anterior part of the nose or the nasal cavity only we can inspect. But in this COVID era, we are at least we have the 6 foot distance from the patient. That is why the anterior rhinoscopy are not properly done in cases in this time. So that is the only thing is the diagnosis part of the, there is a clinical examination, the nasal endoscopy. And the nasal endoscopy, we are copy, but we normally we put a nasal mask and we watch opening into the small opening hole into the nasal mask. We can spray only to the nasal part of the 4% xylocaine and then go for the nasal endoscopy and also the decongestant use for this. And we pass through the nasal endoscope through this hole into the nasal cavity. And with the protection of your your mask and also the head shield and all the things you can use for the outdoor basis for the examination.
Okay, now this is for Dr. Soumendranath Bandyopadhyay. Whether you are giving any importance to the anterior rhinoscopy for the diagnosis is, and what is the role of nasal endoscopy? And Dr. Komalendu Haldar is saying he will depend on nasal endoscopy for each and every cases, but whether nasal endoscopy is also safe in this COVID era or not, this is a large question, a great question. So what is your opinion, Dr. Soumendranath Bandyopadhyay?
Mandatory. Because in every textbook or position papers, you say that anterior rhinoscopy should be done, but nasal endoscopy will be the cornerstone. So both are complementary. In our student days, anterior rhinoscopy was the only available procedure by which we could get the view of the middle meatus. Pass in the middle meatus was considered to be the diagnostic sign of chronic rhinosinusitis. But now as nasal endoscopy is in, and the present European position paper of 2012 includes nasal endoscopy to be the objective, to have the objective confirmation of the symptoms of the patient. So nasal endoscopy is must. But considering the present situation, nasal endoscopy cannot be done on every patient. So the first thing first, the symptoms should be addressed. In any case, the treatment initially is symptomatic. Symptomatic relief of the patient is indicated. So we can jolly well take some time to see if our provisional diagnosis of chronic rhinosinusitis is correct or not. Because be it a COVID situation or non-COVID situation, the patients coming with the diagnosis of sinus themselves, these sinus patients are very difficult to deal with. And sometimes and many often that sinus patients are not suffering from sinusitis at all. So chronic rhinosinusitis has a number of differential diagnoses which produce the similar symptoms, and nasal endoscopy ultimately differentiates between these different symptoms. So nasal endoscopy must be done if the symptomatic relief cannot be achieved within a reasonable period of time, say 7 days, no improvement, we will have to consider nasal endoscopy with all the precautions.
Okay. Now, Dr. Monojendra Bhattacharya, what is your opinion regarding the importance of CT scan and whether CT scan can replace nasal endoscopy? And what is the importance of CT scan in the present scenario to diagnose a case of chronic rhinosinusitis?
Good evening, all. CT scan, definitely a radiological importance is there, but the first question is with whether nasal endoscopy would be replaced by CT scan. It's no. As Dr. Bandopadhyay has said, nasal endoscopy would give an objective view of what's happening in the nose and the sinuses. So that's the first thing we need to do. It can be complemented with a CT scan if, with conservative management, after having a nasal endoscopy also, the patient is not getting any symptomatic relief, then a CT scan can give us some added information to us whether anything is going inside the sinuses or not, or how much the disease has progressed or weaned off after the medication. So CT scan definitely gives us some value to chronic rhinosinusitis management, but it can't be replaced by nasal endoscopy.
Okay. Now, this question is for Dr. Snehashish Bormon. There are different predisposing factors of chronic rhinosinusitis, and today we have understood that this is basically an inflammatory disease, and in many cases, the bacteria or fungi may be present but may not be present. In your day-to-day practice, what is your opinion regarding this segment, that is for the infective chronic rhinosinusitis?
Yeah, good evening to all. There are many predisposing factors for chronic rhinosinusitis. We know most important is any structural deformity and pollution factor and allergy factor. But infection is very important. Bacterial infection is most important, and in very long-standing cases, and in some cases of immunocompromised patients like diabetic patients and patients taking antibiotic for long period, we get fungal infections, and also in allergic fungal sinusitis, we get fungi in the sinuses. Bacterial infection is very important, so we give antibiotic for the chronic rhinosinusitis.
Okay, Dr. Somendranath Bandyopadhyay, what is your opinion regarding the importance of environmental factors for the chronic rhinosinusitis? And as because you are seeing lots of patients in your day-to-day practice, what is your opinion regarding this infective etiology in present day scenario for the chronic rhinosinusitis?
Diffuse rhinosinusitis, chronic rhinosinusitis with nasal polyposis. It is allergic. Maybe it is allergic, the patient is allergic to the bacterial superantigen, maybe allergic to the fungal antigens, maybe allergic to the allergic allergens, but it is some sort of allergic reaction. Most probably it is some sort of allergic reaction to some factors. and environmental factors come prominently in these allergic factors. So the environmental allergic factors are definitely most important predisposing factor for development and persistence of chronic rhinosinusitis, in my opinion.
Okay. Dr. Komalendu Haldar, what is your opinion regarding the different anatomical factors in case of chronic rhinosinusitis?
Anatomical factors, most is there any anatomical variation like a craniofacial deformity, cleft palate, or any anatomical variation into the nose, the septum, the deviated septum, or the concha bullosa, or any halar cell, or any paradoxical middle terminate, and any atelectatic maxillary sinuses. And there is others. There is sometimes there is some sort of the ciliary movement, but ciliary dyskinesia, and like a Cartagena syndrome, and the systemic. There is a systemic fibrosis, cystic fibrosis, and also the fungal sinusitis. And there is a immunologic factor like IgA, IgG deficiency, and gamma globulinemia and HIV patient. These are the anatomical factors, and also there is a immunological factor that play a role in the predisposition of the chronic rhinosinusitis.
Okay. As we all know, basically in today's scenario, there are two types of sinusitis, CRS with polyp and CRS without polyp, and another is allergic and non-allergic one. So basically the goal of management of chronic rhinosinusitis are reduction of inflammation, improving sinus drainage, improving mucociliary clearance, and reducing mucosal edema. And as we all know, as because this is a inflammatory disease, so we should try our level best to give maximal medical therapy. And these are the options of maximal medical therapy. Now, I will ask this question to Dr. Manojendra Bhattacharya, whether you will offer maximal medical therapy for all the cases of chronic rhinosinusitis, or in some cases you will go straight away for the surgery. Because in present day scenario, with the availability of the endoscope, microdebrider, and so on, we used to get many prescriptions where directly the patient is basically offered with surgery and all these things. So what is your opinion regarding the maximal medical therapy?
Maximal medical therapy means medical therapy which will help in reducing the inflammation. Our main aim, as you have said, is improve ventilation of the sinuses and nasal cavity, and also increase or improve the drainage from the nose and the sinuses. So that can be achieved by medical management, provided if there are some conditions which on nasal endoscopy we find, like granulomatous diseases, or some mass is there which is hindering the drainage, or there is some anatomical variation which is causing some hindrance in the drainage and causing inflammation. In those situations only we can go for surgery from the very beginning, but medical management is the keystone for majority of the cases of chronic rhinosinusitis.
Okay, this is a very important message. That means in most of the cases, we should try for maximal medical therapy for chronic rhinosinusitis patients. Now, this question is for Dr. Snehashish Bormon. According to you, what is the importance of steroids, both the varieties, topical and systemic, in the field of maximal medical therapy for CRS?
As we are discussing about chronic rhinosinusitis, it is a chronic inflammatory procedure, and the management targets towards reducing the chronic inflammation. And steroid is most important part of the medical management of chronic rhinosinusitis. Uh, in case of polyps and very inflammatory mucosa, we have to give a steroid, systemic steroid, and in other cases we use topical steroid, topical nasal spray. We have to give topical nasal spray for a long duration. It is important both to reduce inflammation, even if we think about doing surgery. This is important to give full treatment with systemic and topical steroid before surgery also.
Okay. Dr. Shomendranath Bandyopadhyay, what is your opinion regarding these steroids, and which type of steroids are basically used nowadays? Do you have any specific preference for specific situations, and what is the time period of continuation of this steroid therapy for systemic and for topical?
Steroids are the mainstay in treatment of chronic rhinosinusitis, pre or post-op. Steroids should be given, topical steroids will be given the first preference. The papers suggest that all the steroids are more or less the same. The older steroids may have some greater bioavailability compared to the newer steroids, but considering the effect, the older and newer steroids are same. Now, topical steroids should be given the first preference, and for the severe cases, systemic steroids have to be prescribed. Now, for topical steroids, we can give it either as drop. Some of the books say that the drops may have a better efficacy. We may give it in the form of nasal sprays, but what is advocated is high volume nasal douching with steroids may have some better efficacy. Regarding this oral steroid, the systemic steroid, methylprednisolone, 32 milligram daily, then 16 milligram daily, then 8 milligram daily for 1 week each. That means 3 weeks treatment with oral steroid have to be tried in severe cases. That means if you have a VAS scale that is 8, 9, 10, more than 8, if the VAS scale is more than 8, then we can consider systemic steroids. So steroid in any form should be continued for how long? For mild and moderate cases, the European position paper says that it can be continued for 3 months, and after that you reconsider it. For severe cases, you continue it for 1 month, then reassess. If improves, continue it for 3 months, and then reassess again. For how long? I have seen papers which give you data for continuous steroid use, intranasal corticosteroid use for 1 year, and that also did not produce any side effects. So the maximum period that I have come across is 1 year. But here, every 3 months, the European position paper says that you must review the cases every 3 months.
Okay, that means the thing is that the newer generation of the steroids having less bioavailability, so it is safer and can be continued for prolonged duration. Now, this is for Dr. Kamalendu Haldar. According to you, what are the preferred antimicrobials? That means antibiotics or antifungals in your day-to-day practice. That means in your day-to-day practice, what will be your choice for antimicrobials in case of chronic rhinosinusitis?
Normally, we are using the broad spectrum antibiotic like amoxicillin with clavulanic acid, and coamoxiclav. or the cefuroxime acetal, but before we can going for the antimicrobial, we are nasal swab or the swab from the middle meatus, and that's the same for the cultural sensitivity and particular antibiotic. We can prefer that antibiotic. But in cases of the chronic rhinosinusitis, if the polyposis cases, for the polyposis cases, we use also the doxycycline. But in cases of the non-polypoidal chronic rhinosinusitis, that case is macrolide like a clarithromycin and maybe used.
Okay. So most likely you are preferring this doxycycline or macrolides for their anti-inflammatory effect and not because of their antibiotic effects in case of polyposis. Now this is for Dr. Monojendra Bhattacharya. What is your opinion regarding sinus irrigation?
Sinus irrigation definitely helps a lot immensely, as Dr. Bandyopadhyay has also said regarding irrigation works hand in hand with steroids, either topical or systemic, because it washes away the mucus which is laden with the allergens, or even there is one thing which we need to emphasize on is a biofilm. So it's also said that biofilm is something which causes hindrance in the penetrance of antibiotics. Now, this substance which is entangled, this microorganisms which is entangled in the protective layer, can be washed away with the irrigation. So that's of great importance, definitely. And usually, again, there is a debate which one to use, whether it's hypertonic or whether it's isotonic. Both of them have their positive and negativities, but hypertonic causes irritation locally in the mucosa. So most preferably, isotonic saline is used for irrigation in most of the cases.
Okay. Now this is for Dr. Snehashish Barman. What is your opinion regarding the importance of mucolytic and the antihistaminics, and whether you will prefer the non-sedative antihistaminics or sedative antihistaminics in case of allergic chronic rhinosinusitis?
In case of allergic chronic rhinosinusitis, we have to give antihistamine, and obviously in today's world, where the patients are working, active patients, so we have to prefer for non-sedating antihistamines. And mucolytic, there is, I didn't find any documentation in support of mucolytics, so I don't use mucolytics in my day-to-day practice.
Okay, now we come to the last part of our discussion. This is for Dr. Soumendranath Bandyopadhyay. Whether you will offer functional endoscopic sinus surgery or open surgery in all cases of chronic rhinosinusitis, or you are having some choice for the cases in case of chronic rhinosinusitis for the operation.
If the medical management fails, then we will have to go for the surgery to open up the sinuses and then continue with the medical therapy. So you cannot move away from the surgical management of this chronic rhinosinusitis, which is refractory to initial medical management. And definitely endoscopic surgery is the choice, because you can have a closer look, you can go to the nooks and corners, and the morbidity is much less. But regarding open surgeries, if the endoscopic surgery fails, or if there is any revision, or if for maxillary surgery itself, if the polyps can be, or the disease cannot be removed entirely by endoscopes, then we can add this external approach to complement the nasal surgery. So COFACE, or what is also known as COFACE. So we can also employ that. We should not have any rigid mindset about this should be done and this should not be done. So you can have a flexible choice to help the patient as much as possible to allow irrigation of the sinuses by opening up the passages. When the initial medical management fails, after surgery, we will continue with the medical management.
Okay. Now this is for Dr. Monojendra Bhattacharya. In this COVID era for chronic rhinosinusitis, basically after this discussion, it is clear this is an inflammatory disease. Whether you will offer functional endoscopic sinus surgery with microdebrider to the patient, or you will opt for open surgery.
Definitely looking at the comorbidities with open surgery, reduced hospital stay, reduced time taken for the surgery, I would offer for functional endoscopic sinus surgery, taking every protective measure. So that's the thing, because open surgery also, it doesn't mean that we are not working at that area which harbors the virus. So in both the types of surgeries, we are working in that area. Yes, if we use a debrider, then the aerosol and all will be generated more. Chances of virus getting in the outside atmosphere is more. I'll take adequate protection to cover up myself and my team, but definitely endoscopic sinus surgery.
Okay. Dr. Kamalendu Haldar, any last word for the session?
This chronic rhinosinusitis, it is a totally it is a surgical, some part into the surgical, but it is the mode of the total is the medical therapy. In the post-operative, after the surgery, you can also the medical therapy like the steroid, topical, or the oral steroid, or the nasal irrigation, and this one. Then in cases of the you must have there is a recurrent chronic sinusitis or the failure of the surgery, or the failure of the surgery, there is a recurrent polyposis after the surgery 4 or 5 times or 7 times. Then you can identify what is the pathology behind this. So you can also this particular pathology like you can to assess the allergic phase, and there is a non-eosinophilic rhinitis, and also there is a aspirin sensitivity by aspirin exaggerated this allergic sinusitis.
Okay, so with this we conclude this part of the session. So the take-home message is very clear. Chronic rhinosinusitis is a chronic inflammatory disease, and we should offer maximal medical therapy for all the patients. And if maximal medical therapy fail, then we can offer surgery, and functional endoscopic sinus surgery is better. And for maximal medical therapy, the most important is nasal steroid spray. And in this segment, because we have to continue this nasal steroid spray for prolonged duration, and we can choose the newer generation, and so that the bioavailability is less. And if the maximal medical therapy failed, then we can offer the surgical option to the patient. So I want to give thanks to all the panelists for their lively discussion. And now I will request Dr. Saurabh Sarkar to please come and present the paper and discuss the paper regarding all the finer details. And I think it will be helpful for all the junior colleagues. And we are very much thankful to Dr. Saurabh Sarkar. He has joined from Bhubaneswar. He is Associate Professor in AIIMS Bhubaneswar. And now, Saurabh, This is
Thank,
for your purpose.
thank you, Doipanda, for giving me this opportunity. So, can you see it? Can everybody see this? So I will start. Hello.
Yes, we can see.
Okay. So this is, I mean, these are some snippets of a journal of articles in journal which were retracted, and there was a lot of commotion about these articles. So a good journal doesn't necessarily mean that the articles are perfect. So all articles should be scrutinized. So critical appraisal of a journal article, I would be appraising the article. So when you are critically appraising an article, a journal article, I mean, so you might ask, what is the purpose of critical appraisal? The questions, when you are critically appraising a journal, what are the questions to be asked? And then I will tell you, I mean, I will part by part, I will tell you about the journal article and whether the journal article has followed or has properly written or has properly documented, and then we'll summarize. So this is the outline in which I will be talking in this another maybe 20-25 minutes. So first is what is the purpose? Why are we critically appraising an article? I mean, why are we taking so much time and so much effort we are making to critically appraise an article? What is critical appraisal? So it is a process of assessing and interpreting evidence by systematically considering its validity, results, and relevance. So, I mean, when we are doing this, any article in any journal, that means we are critically appraising it, or we are critically analyzing it. So why are we doing it? What is the need of doing these critically? Because these authors have taken so much pain, they have written, they have done some research, they have written an article. So why do we need to recheck again? Because, I mean, you would say that the editorial board and the reviewers have already done it, but there is a need. Why is it? It says that no articles should be automatically considered to be good based on the name of the journal in which it has been published. I have already given you a snippet that the articles which were retracted were in very, very good journals. One was in NEJM and the other was in Lancet, which has got a very, very high impact factor. And that is the reason, I mean, neither should the journal be automatically considered good, neither the institute. All articles should be critically, when you are, and this is essential because we talk about evidence-based medicine, because when we read an article, if we find that this is good and this can be practiced in the thing that they have said, their conclusion, whether it can be practiced in my daily practice. So if I want to practice something new, before practicing something new, I should ensure that the quality of the article or the process that they have, whether they have fulfilled all the criteria of research, whether it should be logical to follow the article, whether it is logical to follow their guidelines or their conclusions. So it is very, very important. And as a part of evidence, as the part of practicing evidence-based medicine, every article which we are following should be critically appraised. So there are some questions that we should be asking. What is it about when we are appraising the article? What are the questions that we should be asking before starting the journal? Before analyzing the article? Is the study question in the article relevant? Does the study add anything new? What is the type of research question that is asked in this study? Was the study design appropriate for research question? Did the study methods address the most important potential sources of bias? Does the study test a stated hypothesis? Was the statistical analysis performed correctly? Do the data justify the conclusions? Are there any conflicts of interest? Even if you are not a reviewer of a journal, but when you are critically appraising any article in any journal, you should always have these things in mind. because you can write a letter to, there is something known as a letter to the editor. If you find that this article is not properly written, or whatever the article has said is not right, or they have not followed the guidelines, or it's not proper, you can definitely write to the editor and say that these are the faults in this article. And if they find it justified, then the article might be retracted, as what has happened in the two journals that I had shown already. So now, the one that I would be analyzing, or I would be dissecting today is the title of the article is a randomized study comparing the efficacy of mometasone furoate and fluticasone furoate on the ocular and nasal symptoms of allergic rhinitis. It is an original article, is published in International Journal of Otorhinolaryngology and Head Neck Surgery, and the authors are Dr. Satvinder, Dr. Surya Narayan, and Dr. Nirmal Kumare, and it was done in MGMCRI Pondicherry. Received in July 2017, revised in 10 July, and accepted in 15 July and published. So the first thing in a journal, in an article that you see, is an abstract. Abstract is like a window to the house when you go inside, or it's a door. You just seeing the abstract, you must have a glimpse of what the article contains. So in the abstract, what do you see? You check whether the objectives are clearly stated. You check whether the basic procedures, selection of study participants, settings, measurements, analytical methods are written properly, and whether the main findings and principal conclusions are there, and whether they match when you read further in the manuscript. Let's see what they have written. They have given a background that ocular symptoms like itching, redness, and congestion are common in patients with allergic rhinitis. The symptoms affect the quality of life and increase the burden on healthcare costs. Intranasal steroids are effective in reducing nasal and ocular symptoms of allergic rhinitis. And their aim of the study is, they have not mentioned it separately, they have kept in the background, is to compare the efficacy of mometasone furoate and fluticasone furoate in reducing the nasal and ocular symptoms of allergic rhinitis. Now, coming to methods. They have recruited 90 patients, or they have 90 patients with perennial allergic rhinitis and ocular symptoms, who were randomly divided into two groups. One was getting mometasone furoate 20 micrograms, and the other was getting, group B was getting 110 micrograms of fluticasone furoate daily. And the patients were assessed on a total ocular symptom score, or TOS, and total nasal symptom score, TNSS, at 2 weeks, 6 weeks, and 12 weeks. And in the results, they say that in both groups, like the TOS and the TNSS scores have improved, and the score in fluticasone furoate was more. The improvement in TOS score in fluticasone furoate was more than in mometasone furoate by 6 weeks, which continued till 12 weeks. So they've concluded that fluticasone furoate is more effective than mometasone furoate in managing the ocular and nasal symptoms of allergic rhinitis. The keywords of this abstract are, these are mesh terms, medical searching history. They are known as mesh terms. When you search these, with these keywords in the PubMed, you will get a lot of articles, and it should be one of them. So these terms they use in keywords, that is allergic rhinitis, allergic rhinoconjunctivitis, ocular symptoms, mometasone furoate, fluticasone furoate, and intranasal steroids. Coming to introductions, what should we see in a journal when we check an introduction? Introduction should be a brief review of relevant literature. It should be the statement on the need and purpose of why was this study done, statement about the significance of the problem being investigated, and it should have a research hypothesis where appropriate, whether the research question is clearly stated, is the study needed or not. So the introduction should have all these points. When I go through the introduction, you would yourself would be able to say whether this article, the introduction of this article, has these points or not. So, they say that allergic rhinitis is one of the commonest conditions, increasing with increasing pollution and environmental exposure. The incidence is increasing worldwide. Nearly 30% of these patients will experience ocular symptoms like itching, tearing, and congestion, which can be quite bothersome to the patient and which affects their quality of life. Pathophysiology, they have talked about it. Contact with allergens reflects through the nasal mucosa. What are the ocular conditions? They are seasonal allergic conjunctivitis, perennial allergic conjunctivitis, atopic giant papillary conjunctivitis, atopic keratoconjunctivitis, and vernal keratoconjunctivitis. Amongst these conditions, the atopic keratoconjunctivitis and vernal keratoconjunctivitis is dangerous because it can compromise the cornea and it might cause ulceration and scarring. So, for the treatment of allergic rhinitis, we use intranasal corticosteroids as ENT surgeons, we all know, and it is one of the most effective modality to control symptoms and minimal systemic absorption. Then they go on to say that earlier trials which have studied the effects of intranasal corticosteroids on the ocular symptoms like itchiness, redness, tearing, and swelling of eyes, but no randomized studies have compared the long-term efficacy of mometasone furoate and fluticasone furoate in relieving ocular symptoms of allergic rhinitis. This was a bit fishy, so I went into the net and I saw that there is an article which was published in 2013. Remember, this study is published in 2017. This study, which was published in 2013, they have already done, and their study was also showing the efficacy of mometasone furoate and fluticasone furoate in rhinoconjunctivitis, and it was a much better journal, Allergic Rhinol, and it was done in Malaysia. And their follow-up period was 8 weeks. Theirs is 12 weeks. 1 month. Not much of a difference. It's not that they have done only 2 months and theirs is 6 months or on a year. So 1 month. They're saying that no randomized study has done it. But I went and saw that there is a randomized study which was done in 2013. So this statement of theirs is not correct. Coming to the methods. When you are checking the method, what are the things that you should be checking? The study population and participants, whether they have defined them properly. You see the study design and sample size. If they have, they should mention, how did they come to that particular sample size? The measurement procedures, how did they measure the various values? The statistical analysis, how they did it? And did the study follow the reporting guidelines, which is CONSORT? I'll tell you later on what is CONSORT and what are the reporting guidelines. So let's see what this study has done. They said that patients with persistent allergic rhinitis, and they have they're designated as per area criteria with ocular symptoms and a positive skin prick test with a wheal more than 3 millimeters. And patients had been symptomatic more than 1 meters and a baseline ocular score of more than 4. They have excluded some patients. Who are these patients that they have excluded? Who are already on ocular topical corticosteroids, in whom there is contraindication of steroid use, or who were suffering from eye disorders like glaucoma, corneal ulcer, atopic or vernal keratoconjunctivitis, etc. Patients having concomitant nasal pathology like nasal polyps, deviated nasal septum, and smokers were excluded from the study. Now, they say that they have screened 136 patients and only 100 patients were included in the study as they have agreed to it. Nowhere it is mentioned how did they come to this particular number of 136 or 100, because in a sample, when you are calculating a sample size, a lot of things you have to keep in mind. Well, while we are calculating the minimum difference expected, the degree of variation, level of significance, power of the study, dropout rate, non-compliance, all these things you have to keep in mind while you are calculating a sample size. Nowhere in the article they have mentioned it. So about the sample size, how they come to 136, how they come to 100, they did not mention at all. So 100 patients agreed to undergo the study, and 50-50 were distributed in each group, Group A and B. 4 from Group A and 6 from Group B lost to follow-up. Study design, if you're comparing two steroids, a randomized control trial, fair enough. You would do a randomized control trial only. And they said by which method they have generated this control. They have generated, it was a computer generated random number, fair enough. They mentioned that they have negated the bias by blinding the patient, the investigator, and the pharmacist. I don't know what is the point of blinding a pharmacist, because I mean, if you are blinding a patient and the investigator, then it becomes a double blind. Pharmacist doesn't play a role in here. But if you are blinding the person who would analyze the data, then it becomes a triple blind. So 3 persons in the thing doesn't make it a triple. Pharmacist is doubling as an analyst and he's blinded, then it becomes a triple blind. Otherwise, blinding the pharmacist is useless. I mean, you don't need to do it, rather. Now, the 2 groups, group A is mometasone furoate, which received 200 micrograms once daily, and group B is fluticasone furoate, which received 110 micrograms once daily for 3 months. Both these groups received for 3 months. Coming to methods, it was mentioned the average score of the preceding 1 week and the day of visit were calculated at 2, 6, and 12 weeks interval. I really did not know what exactly they meant. I mean, why will you mention? I mean, why will you average a score of a preceding 1 week when you are saying that you are calling the patient on the 2nd week, 6th week, and the 12th week? So, I mean, if you're averaging a score of 1 week prior to 2 weeks, so it becomes 1, 2, 5, 6, 11, and 12. So it doesn't come to 2, 6, and 12. So I did not get the point. So that was not clear in the article. Coming to, at each visit, the patient underwent thorough history, clinical, nasal, and ocular examinations. What did they see? The eye symptoms were evaluated by an ophthalmologist with a TOS score, which sees redness, swelling, itching, and watering of the eyes. Each score from 0 to 4. I mean, 0 is none of them, and 4 is all of the time. And the maximum score is 16. And what is TNSS? This is the nasal symptom score. So it sees what are the things that they check: nasal congestion, sneezing, rhinorrhea, difficulty in sleeping, and pruritus. So it also has from 0 to 3. I mean, 0 is none, no symptoms evident. 1 is mild, symptoms present but easily tolerated. 2 is moderate, definite awareness of symptoms, bothersome but tolerable. And 3 is severe, symptoms hard to tolerate, interferes with daily activity. The nasal symptoms are then added for each time, and the points to reach the TNSS, the total score will range from 0 to 15. So, I mean, this was not the blue part is not given. It was not given in the text. I just added just to give you an idea what this score is, just to give the audience an idea what this TNSS score is. So what did they do basically? What statistical measures did they undertake? All the quantitative variables, measurements of central location, that is mean and median, and the measurements of dispersion, standard deviation, TOS and TNSS scores analyzed using paired independent t-tests and one-way ANOVA test. The chi-square test was used, or chi-square test, whatever you say, was used for comparisons of the gender distribution of the groups. A p-value of less than 0.05 was considered as statistically significant. Now, coming to what ideally would you do? A score is a non-parametric data, or ranks and scores. It is not summarized as mean, it is summarized as median. And what are the statistical tests that you use? If the data sets are less than 2, then you use a Wilcoxon sign rank test or a Mann-Whitney U test. And if the data set is more than 2, then you use a Friedman test or a Kurzweil-Wallis test. You don't use a t-test or an ANOVA test for a data which has a score. So they have used a paired t-test, independent test, and an ANOVA test, which is not right. They should have used a non-parametric, either Wilcoxon or Mann-Whitney or Friedman's or Kurzweil-Wallis test. So they have used a wrong test for measuring or for statistical analysis. If it is a dichotomous data, then you use McNemar's test. If the data set is less than 2, and if the data set is more than 2, you use a Cochrane-Q or a chi-square test. Coming to the results. So what did they get? What would you see in a result? First is, are the research questions reflected in the results? Are the competing or alternative explanations given for the findings? Does the data in the results section justify the conclusion? And are the statistical methods used justified and proper? So from my previous, from the method section, I already have said, and you can pretty well see that the statistical method is not justified. So, I mean, doesn't matter. Let's go and see what they have done in the results section. So, well, I mean, they have, they say that there is no statistically significant difference between group A and group B in terms of age. It was like 30.6 plus minus 2 and 31.1 plus minus 1.6 respectively. Gender also, they said 21 males, 23 females, 21 males, 25 females, 21. They were also not statistically significant. They used a chi-square test. It is fine because it's a dichotomous data. I don't have any problem when they use a chi-square test for a dichotomous data. Dichotomous data is data like male or female, yes, no, because they have two answers, this or that, this or that. Okay, I mean, either it's a yes or it's a no, either it's a female or a male. Coming to the table where they have used TOSS and TNSS, that is total ophthalmic symptom score and total nasal symptom score. So they have said that the baseline scores were not significant. I agree, but what did they use? They have used paired t-test and independent t-test and one-way ANOVA test. So the statistics itself falls flat because the test that they used is not a proper test. They should have used, if they are doing, less than 2 or less than 2, they should have used Mann-Whitney test. They have used ANOVA test, paired t-test, independence test, which is absolutely, it should not be done in here. So, I'm not going into it. So you can pretty well understand the validity of these results. Again, coming to TNSS scores, they are saying that reduction in TNSS scores is statistically significant in both groups. A, the score has come from 5.56 plus minus 2.24 to 2.37 plus minus 1.23. Again, group B, they say, it has come from group 1, they have, group A, as you know, they have used fluticasone furoate, and group B, they have used mometasone furoate. So they say that from 5.40, it has come to 2.15, but then it is a score. You don't get a score. So, just to explain, so what is a score and why I'm not giving any value or any importance to what they have done over here. A score is, suppose you are measuring how many patients of cancer have been treated. So 1, 2, you have 4 categories like stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. So you will have a median. I had the maximum number of patients were in stage 3. You don't have a 3.54 or 1.25. That doesn't happen. It's a score. So when you are measuring a score, this is not the way you measure. This statistical significance falls flat. So the rest, you can pretty well understand. They are saying that they are not significant in at the end of 2 weeks, 6 weeks, 12 weeks. But you can pretty well understand that this is not a proper statistical test that they should be using. So I don't have to explain anything anymore. Again, when you see the TOS score, total ophthalmic symptom score, again they have used independent t-test, one-way ANOVA test, which they should not be using. And using those tests, they are saying that we have got a significant with a p-value of 0.0000, whatever. But then they should not be using this test. Again, this statistical test falls flat. So you can pretty well understand the importance of. They are saying that but 6 weeks it was significant. More significant, less significant. Everything falls flat because the statistical test that they have used is not correct. Coming to the adverse effects that they have mentioned, they incidence of adverse effects in their group was 22.6 in mometasone group and 14.8 in fluticasone group. Overall incidence adverse effects was 18.7. What were the things? There were dryness, crusting of nose, pharyngitis, mild burning sensation in the nose. None of the patients had to discontinue the use of nasal sprays. None of the patients developed epistaxis. So coming to the last part of it, that is discussions. What do we check when we check an article for discussion. The comments in the discussion consistent with results and questions being asked, consistency or lack of consistency between present study and other published studies, extrapolations beyond what should be done. I mean, extrapolation beyond data should be avoided. Are the research questions adequately answered? Limitations of the study should be discussed, which might affect the conclusion. Limitations with suggestions for further research. So if the article is a very good quality article, then not only will it say what are the limitations. If you read some of the articles, you will see that some good articles, they will tell you the limitations of the study, and even they will say that the limit, and they will tell that maybe we can do like this, or maybe we can do like that. So they will give suggestions for further research. What are the discussions? This scientist, Bernstein et al., established the efficacy of fluticasone in controlling the ocular symptoms of seasonal allergic rhinitis. Kaiser et al. 2007 analyzed the efficacy of fluticasone furoate in controlling ocular symptoms of allergic rhinitis. Rodrigo et al. In 2011, he had a systematic review which said that efficacy of fluticasone furoate versus placebo in ocular and nasal symptoms of allergic rhinitis, and he concluded that fluticasone furoate nasal spray at the dose of 110 microgram once daily is effective in improving ocular and nasal symptoms with better quality of life. So Hamizan et al. in 2013 said that fluticasone furoate is more effective. However, he followed the patient for only a month and the sample size was small. So this study was weighing heavily on this Hamizan et al., saying that fluticasone furoate is much better. And then what I did was I went and I read this article also. I read Hamizan et al. Also, and I found that in his study, he found that efficacy of, what did he do? To check the efficacy of mometasone furoate and fluticasone furoate on persistent allergic rhinoconjunctivitis in 63 patients. Both groups, there was significant decrease in nasal and ocular symptoms after 1 week, but no significant difference after the treatment between the groups. Mind you, no significant differences after treatment in between the groups. They did an acoustic rhinomanometry. No statistically significant difference was found in fluticasone furoate nasal spray. And they say that there was improvement in fluticasone over mometasone after 1 month, but not at the end of 2 months. So they go on to say that when they did an acoustic rhinomanometry, fluticasone furoate showed us improvement at the end of 1 month, but at the end of 2 months, it was not statistically significant. Both the sprays were equally effective. Now, Keith et al. He reviewed studies and analyzing the efficacy of intranasal corticosteroids, ocular symptoms of allergic rhinitis, efficacy in controlling the ocular symptoms, concluded that fluticasone furoate to be the most effective. Now, let's see what Keith et al. Has done. Now, Keith et al. Had a declaration in his article, which was, he declared that his review article was sponsored by a multinational pharmaceutical company, which had that particular corticosteroid intranasal spray. So you can understand, you have to read even in between the lines. When you are, if you are saying that something is very good, just check whether it has been funded by a particular company. So then you have to be doubly cautious to check whether, his article, whether it's a review or whatever, is properly done or not. Because then, there is always a doubt in your mind whether it is motivated or not. And then the discussion says that the mechanism proposed are systematic absorption of for reduction in the ocular symptoms, systematic absorption of the drug, improved drainage of allergen-laden ocular secretions because of decreased inflammation and swelling of the lower end of the nasolacrimal duct, ocular deposition of the duct via the nasolacrimal duct, attenuation of nasoocular reflex. So out of all these, the reduction of nasoocular reflex due to anti-inflammatory activity of intranasal steroids have been proven. So yes, they did say about the limitations of the study. They said that the duration of the study is short. But then, if you remember in the introduction, they have said that there was no randomized control study, no long duration randomized control study or something like that. But then in the limitations, when you come to the end of the paper, I mean, they most probably have forgotten what they've written in the introduction. Now they are saying that it's a short duration. So what exactly do they want to say? I mean, I'm a bit confused as the author. So then they say that there is a lack of an objective way to monitor compliance of patients to the intranasal steroid. That is fine, I agree. Patients were a heterogeneous group, although all had symptoms more than a year, they differed in the actual duration of their symptoms. That might be true, but what I felt was a limitation is they did not consider whether the patients, because they said they are taking in patients of perennial rhinitis, whether the patients were taking any antihistaminics or not, nothing was mentioned in there. Because I mean, more often than not, if a patient is of chronic or perennial allergic rhinitis, then they usually tend to take oral antihistaminics or intranasal antihistaminics. So they did not mention those things, which I found to be a bit off limiting. So then they say that the next part of the discussion says that ocular safety of intranasal established only a few ocular adverse effects were reported during many years of extensive research. Yes, the ocular safety of intranasal steroids supported long-term study by Bernstein. Patients treated with mometasone furoate nasal spray there was no significant increase in intraocular pressure or risk of subcapsular cataracts. The concern was for safety and systemic absorption and possibility of suppression of hypothalamic pituitary axis. Many studies established the intranasal steroid systemic bioavailability is very, very low. So there is very, very less chance of the suppression of the HPA axis. So with those discussions, we come to the conclusion. So what ideally should be in the conclusion? I mean, what they have said in the conclusion, ocular symptoms are common in patients with allergic rhinitis and can affect the quality of life. Yes, there is no doubt about it. Both fluticasone furoate and mometasone furoate are effective in reducing ocular and nasal symptoms of allergic rhinitis. Yes, they do. Then they go on to say that fluticasone furoate is more effective in reducing the ocular symptoms. I'm a bit reserved to comment on this statement because as far we go with this article, I'm really not convinced to support this statement of theirs. And then they say that hence intranasal fluticasone furoate is recommended as an effective and safe modality for control of both nasal and ocular symptoms. So again, I mean, as I'm not very convinced, so I mean, I would not say that it is, I mean, it is recommended, yes, you can use, but whether it is better or not, so I'm not really convinced with alone this article. So it has to be a better study, maybe yes, and a better design study or a better written article and a better design study. So they said that there were no funding sources and there were no conflicts of interest, and it was approved by, their study was approved by the Institutional Ethical Committee. These were their references. And when I said that I will talk about whether they have followed the consort guidelines. These are the guidelines. I mean, I have finished off the articles. This is just a tidbit that I'm telling you. Consort guideline is a guideline by which you report an article. When you're writing for a very, very good journal, you have to follow these reporting guidelines. Like if you're writing a randomized control trial, you have to follow the consort guideline. Suppose you're writing a case report, you have to follow the case care guideline. So these are some of the guidelines which you see in the Equator network, and they have, I mean, they have formats, they have templates which you can use when you are doing your study or when you're reporting your study. These are the consort guidelines. Now, we went through these questions, and we now, after completing the study, I will ask each and everyone, whoever is watching this this journal, I mean, whoever is attending this journal club. Now let's see, is the study question relevant? Did they really put a question? Does the study add anything new? Did it add anything new? I mean, I will not answer. I mean, I will leave it for you to answer and answer yourself. Did the study add anything new? What type of research question was being asked? I mean, did you get what the research question was? Was the study design appropriate for the research question? a randomized control trial would be like is a very good approach to when you compare two drugs. Did the study method address the most important potential source of bias? Does the study test a stated hypothesis? Did the study have a hypothesis? I did not see any hypothesis. Was the statistical analysis performed correctly? I already explained whether, I mean, you can pretty well judge whether the statistical analysis that they used were correct or not. Now coming to, I mean, do the data justify the conclusions? I mean, if the statistics is not, I mean, what they should be used, so you can pretty well understand what the data are. And I mean, if the data they are getting with the, I mean, with the statistics, with the statistical method they should not use. So, I mean, does it justify the conclusion? I mean, it's for you to judge whether it justifies or not. And I mean, yes, there are no conflicts of interest. With this, I thank you, and I end my presentation.
Thank you, Saurabh, for your nice presentation. And I will like to request Dr. Amen Bhattacharya, Dr. Somendranath Bandyopadhyay, and Dr. Kamalendu Haldar, please join. And we have lots of questions. Okay, and this is the level of this journal club is day by day is gradually elevated. So we have plenty of questions, and some of them are repetitive one. So I just want to ask one question to Dr. Saurabh Sarkar. Can you say something about the role of confounders and effect modifiers in a study?
Confounders are, I mean, like factors which are present, which might be present in both the groups, and which might affect the result of the study. I mean, they are present both in the case group as well as the control group. And effect modifiers is a bit different. Like, I mean, whether because you are taking something, whether your habit has changed or not, that is the effect modifier. Suppose, I mean, if you are giving something, if you're giving a drug to the case group and you're not giving a drug to the control group, the case group will change the behavior because you have given a drug. So if you're giving a drug to the case group, I mean, suppose you're giving an oral drug, it is advised that you give an oral placebo to even the control group so that their behavior is not changed. That is your modifier effect.
Okay, now this question is for Dr. Somendranath Bandyopadhyay. This is specific for you. Do you advocate combination of steroid and fexofenadine to start with in case of allergic chronic rhinosinusitis?
Okay, it depends on which case you are treating, at what stage you are treating, whether you are the first physician to treat the case or not, whether the patient comes to you with a lot of documents in his folder. So everything should be considered. If it is allergic, if it is allergic to environmental allergens, you go for anti-allergics. But if you consider, if you give intranasal corticosteroids, it is the mainstay. Anti-allergics are not always recommended. You will have to go for intranasal corticosteroids. You will have to go for nasal douching. You will have to go for this nasal endoscopy and whatever your findings are, and you modify your other drugs. So these are the two basic things: intranasal corticosteroid and nasal douching. If you want to add another drug, will depend on your findings.
Okay. Now, this is for Dr. Monojendu Bhattacharya. Nasal irrigation, ISO or hypo is advocated, but have you ever thought of mixing potassium permanganate?
Okay. Nasal irrigation, actually it's ISO or hyper actually. Either of them we go for. Now regarding potassium permanganate, yes, at one point of time potassium permanganate was used, and if I can recollect properly, then it's a very strong oxidizing agent, and it is also antiseptic and antifungal. But having said that, it has a plethora of side effects. It has definitely symptoms, adverse symptoms, cardiovascular depression, hepatic and renal are there, bleeding tendency, methemoglobinemia. There are loads of things, even gastric irritation and all are there. So potassium permanganate is not recommended or it's not encouraged nowadays because again we have specific antibiotics and specific antifungals with which we can use instead of potassium permanganate.
Okay, this is for Dr. Komalendu Haldar. How should we taper systemic steroids if it has to be given for months? Dr. Komalendu Haldar? Okay, I think there is some connectivity issue with Dr. Komalendu Haldar. This is for Dr. Snehashish Burman. How should we taper systemic steroids if it has to be given for months? Snehashish, unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
It was already described by Dr. Bandyopadhyay during the panel. The recommended is methylprednisolone 32 milligram for 7 days, and then tapering in 3 weeks. Every week tapering. 16 milligram for another 7 days and milligram for another 7 days.
Okay, and now Dr. Komalendu Haldar.
Yes.
Okay, this is a question for you. If we are considering FACE for chronic rhinosinusitis, whether this will be a full house FACE or it is customized one?
Normally, that
depends on
Hello.
Yeah, please.
That depends on
the pathology.
There is some problem with your connectivity.
Okay.
Yeah. Please proceed.
His connection got hung, I think.
Okay, so for this question, this is always customized and we should go at least one step ahead. If it is an extensive one, then we should go for full house FACE. But if it is a limited disease and only one set of sinus is actually affected, then we should go at least one step ahead, because in some of the cases, as we have found that suppose the disease is basically in the anterior ethmoids or anterior group of sinuses, then when we are actually reaching the posterior group of sinuses, again we may found some amount of disease, and that is the cause of recurrence in many cases. So it is always advisable to go one step ahead. Dr. Komalendu Haldar?
Yes.
The connection is stable now?
Are you hearing me?
No.
No.
Okay. This is for Dr. Snehashish Burman. In the present day scenario, if the patient is complaining of loss of smell sensation with rhinitis, is it justifiable to go for a test of COVID in absence of other signs of COVID-19? You have seen quite a few patients in recent past.
Yeah. Actually, the practical thing is when I in my chamber, patients come with symptoms of anosmia, but other symptoms are not there. If I ask them to go for COVID test, they will run out from my chamber. That is the practical thing. But I will ask them to maintain isolation and go for and attend in go for COVID test if there is other symptoms are present.
Okay, Saurabh, this is for you. Is there any role of preoperative systemic steroids? Actually, this thing is already discussed, but still.
Preoperative systemic steroids will make your, I mean, if it's an extensive polyp, will make your life much easier. So I mean, not a prolonged, maybe maybe 5 days course would be a good thing. It will make your life much easier, but then it has a opposite effect. Some people don't like it because they say that, I mean, it will give you a false sense of security, and it will come back. I mean, it will help you dissect, but then it will give you a false sense of security. So I mean, it depends on the surgeon actually.
But chronic rhinosinusitis with polyposis, I think it is always better to go for 5 to 7 days systemic steroids, because it will help to reduce the size of the polyps. So there is better visibility, better understanding of the anatomy, and blood loss is also less after giving the systemic steroids, obviously if there is no contraindication. And now this is for Dr. Monojendra Bhattacharya. How do you suggest we should counsel the patient for continuation of the medication in allergic chronic rhinosinusitis cases, and how long should medical therapy continue?
We need to make them understand about what's the whole situation going on. So that's the most important thing. If it is allergic, how this allergy is affecting his or her airway system, which includes the lining of the nose and the paranasal sinuses, and what's the effect of it. And this medication, how long we need to continue, depends on actually the progression of the disease, which on staggered way, we will be asking the patients to come to our clinic when we will assess, and according to the assessment, we will have to renew the medication or we need to re-prescribe or alter the medication, whatever is needed.
Okay, this is last question to Dr. Shaumendranath Bandyopadhyay. The role of local irrigation with steroid or antibiotic post-phase.
There is no information about local application of antibiotics after phase, be it in the form of drops or ointments, whatever you say. But you'll have to continue with this nasal irrigation, sinus irrigation with corticosteroids for quite a long time. And you'll have to counsel the patient for the long follow-up, maybe lifelong follow-up for such cases even after surgery.
Still, we are getting lots of questions, and one question is coming repetitively. I will ask this question to Dr. Snehashish Burman. What is the role of immunotherapy?
Role of immunotherapy is only in cases of allergic rhinosinusitis, where it is not responding to treatment or it is recurrent. In that case, we can go for allergy skin prick test and go for sublingual immunotherapy.
Okay, so most likely we are having more than 250 viewers today. Right now I don't have the exact data, but most likely it is more than 250. So I am very much thankful to all the panelists and all the speakers, and also AY West Bengal Executive Committee and President of AY West Bengal, all for conceptualizing this AY West Bengal Journal Club. And now at the end, I will request Mr. Manoj Kumar Joshi, the Eastern Regional Head of Sanofi, to say a few words and to give vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir. Am I audible, Dr. Sir?
Yes.
So, respected sirs and all clinicians, on behalf of Sanofi, I would like to sincerely thank Dr. Dayaphan Mukherjee sir for moderating the sessions very effectively. engaging all the panelists, and possibly taking almost more than 25 questions. And I would also like to thank and extend my sincere thanks to all the eminent clinicians who are a part of panelists today. Dr. S.N. Bandyopadhyay sir, Dr. Snehashish Burman sir, Dr. Kamalendu Haldar sir, Dr. M.N. Bhattacharya sir, and I would like to extend my special thanks to Dr. Saurav Sarkar sir for his enlightening session, and in fact that is of great benefit and value addition to the many doctors. Thanks for sharing valuable information and experience on relevant topics, sir. And I am sure that this is truly an academic feast to all the doctors who have attended this scientific session. I would fail in my duties, sir, if I do not thank each clinician today who has taken out his precious time during these difficult and testing times to attend this scientific session. Sir, you would agree that Sanofi has a presence in more than 60 countries across the world, and we as an organization believes in bringing in research brands to you, as it takes years of dedicated research and hard work to come out with research molecule like Allegra, Enterogermina, Allegra Suspension, and maybe an innovative brand like Allegra Nasal Spray. All these brands are adequately, sir, available with your all nearby retailers, and your patient will not face any problems as far as the brand's availability is concerned. Sir, at the end, I wish on behalf of my all colleagues and on behalf of Sanofi the best of health and safety to all your clinicians, doctors, all your patients and family members. And we would request you finally to kindly allow us to connect through digital mode, virtual mode, till the time situation is normalized. So thank you so much once again, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Please
you.
off live. Please off live.
Good night.